Hi, this is Teddy Burris, and this class is going to introduce you and show you how to use Zoom meetings effectively, which is the goal of doing a virtual meeting, is to do it effectively. In the class, we're going to talk about a lot of different areas, including what is Zoom, make sure everybody's clear on what Zoom meeting is. We'll talk about just the high-level settings for you to get your Zoom account in place and on your device, managing your settings and making sure that you know how they're configured and they're configured as you need them. Then we're going to talk about using Zoom as a participant, navigating the Zoom window, using the basic meeting settings as a participant. Then I'll switch over and we'll talk about using Zoom as a host where you invite other participants to your virtual meeting. Talk about scheduling a Zoom meeting, sharing the URL in different ways, navigating the Zoom window as the host, using the online security options. We'll talk about how to manage participants who are in your Zoom meeting, sharing while you're in the Zoom meeting, sharing your desktop and sharing applications. We'll look at polling questions and look at going live with Facebook or live with YouTube during a Zoom meeting. And then finally, recording your Zoom session. And I'll actually take you into Zoom. I'm going to take you into Zoom two different ways. I'm going to take you in first as a participant, then I'll come back out and I'll come back in as a host and show you some of the live example or presentation of doing what I just talked with you about. Then I'm going to introduce you high level to Zoom webinar. So first of all, what is Zoom Meeting? Well, it's a cloud-based software as a service virtual meeting tool. It is comparable to WebEx and GoToMeeting and LogMeIn and some of these other tools that are out there. It's just a different solution that is really making headways, and a lot of people, including myself, really enjoy using it. You can bring 100 people to a Zoom conversation or virtual meeting, but that's a pretty big meeting to do with Zoom Meeting. You can do high definition screen sharing and even remote control. If someone is having a problem with an application on their desktop, someone remotely could take control over it with permission and security in place. If you're using free Zoom, you can record up to 40 minutes. Now, if you're paying for Zoom, you can record longer sessions. You have some really good participant control features in Zoom Meeting, including chat, video, and audio controls. Now, Zoom is pretty much device agnostic, which means you can run it on a smartphone, a PC, a Mac, a tablet, Google Chrome devices, Chromebooks. You can run it on an iPhone, an iPad, or an Android. You can get into the audio of a Zoom meeting via either the computer, which would be internet-based audio, or through phone dial-in, either one, and you can mix them in a Zoom meeting. It really is pretty easy to get on and pretty easy to use for participants, especially if they've touched it once or twice. And as a host, they're actually pretty easy to use the majority of the features as a host. I like the fact that Zoom is continuously improving, adding new features, especially the most recent one was security icon in the host interface, which really makes it easier to manage the security of your meeting. I've used many. I've used a lot of them, if not all of the primary ones. Again, GoToMeeting, WebEx, LogMeIn, and a few others. They all, and Zoom, just like those, all work pretty good. I like Zoom is easy. I like it's feature rich, and I like it's fairly reliable. I've not really, for me, had any problems using Zoom meetings at all. Let's talk a little bit about why you should use a Zoom meeting. So first of all, continuing collaboration, especially this is April 2020 when I'm recording this. There's a COVID pandemic going on. All of us are trying to, stay home and work from our home offices. We have the ability to continue our collaborative conversation using tools like Zoom. You can bring together your teams into engaging conversations. Much easier with Zoom than you could with a phone call or corporate bridges. You can not only manage and host Zoom meetings as an organization, but you can also, because Zoom is open to anyone and you don't have to always pay for Zoom, your teammates can have their own Zoom account and they can run their own collaborative conversations with individuals or small groups. Much richer presentations, live ideation, engagement opportunities. Again, much better than you can do over phone or Skype or some of the simpler tools out there. Think about this. If you can get people to be collaborative in Zoom meetings, you can save a lot of money without having to fly people into the office or into the corporate headquarters all the time. Not that you shouldn't do that when we can, but there may be an opportunity to let these remote offices, these virtual workers, collaborate through Zoom in addition to coming together again when we can. How about this? Help the environment with less pollution because we're not traveling as much. Huge benefit to our environment. And you can access these meetings from anywhere on any device. You don't always need to be in a home office. I've done meetings in Starbucks. I've done them on a park bench. And no longer do we need to schedule the conference room or the corporate conference bridge or, get the phone numbers from people. It's way easier to do for anybody, anytime, anywhere. And the last bullet point I came up with is flexibility. Again, device agnostic from anywhere. I can pretty easily get on Zoom, send someone an invite, and be doing a live conversation and screen share anywhere I want, anytime I want. So to get on Zoom is really pretty easy. Go to zoom.us, depend upon the device you've got, sign up for free, download the app to your PC, to your Mac, to your Chromebook, download it from the Apple Store or the Play Store, sign up, email address and a password, make sure you're using a different email address and password combination than you use for your bank account, and you're up and ready to go. Make sure you give Zoom access to your camera and access to your microphone. Those options should pop up. I encourage you to use Zoom free before you commit to paying for a month-to-month or an annual subscription. So once you have your account set up, then I recommend either through the web interface or through the app interface of preferences, then go look at your profile setup, look at your settings, and make sure they are set up as you want them to be. Now, if you don't have webinars, don't worry about that. If you're not paying for LinkedIn or doing recordings, don't worry about that. But look at these options so you understand them. By the way, a lot of these options for meetings, you can adjust session by session as you create a meeting. And as I said, you can get to these same settings from the Mac app or from the PC app. On the Mac app, it's under Zoom, go to Preferences and you'll get to this. I do recommend as you're getting started to test your speaker and make sure it works as you expect it to work. Test your microphone, make sure it works as you expect it to work. Get all this working before you do your first Zoom meeting, and it makes it way more efficient. Also look at some of the other settings. Look at the share screen settings, the chat settings. You might want to experiment with virtual background so that you understand what you can do when you're doing your own Zoom meeting. By the way, you can access these settings, interestingly enough, when you're live in a Zoom meeting from the settings options for video settings. This is a bonus lesson that has become necessary for me to produce and share with you. And here's why. There are more people who are out there trying to hack, hijack, harass professionals and people who are using Zoom meetings. And so in order to combat these problems, Zoom has added more security features that you need to be using when you schedule and you run a Zoom meeting. Let me show you a couple things, scheduling a Zoom meeting and then managing a Zoom meeting in the context of security. So when I go to schedule a Zoom meeting, which by the way, I recommend you schedule Zoom meetings, even if they're going to be a half hour from now. That way you can put them together and you can do the things you need to do to make sure there's security. Number one, always put a relevant topic. We talked about date and recurring and all that stuff. I recommend that your meeting ID be generated automatically. That way it's a unique meeting ID and it's not the same one you use over and over again, unless you're doing a recurring meeting. Now, here's the other thing. Always use a unique password. You can use up to 10 characters. Use all 10. The reason you put a password is so that hackers and problematic people out there trying to find your meeting ID can't find your meeting ID, or if they do, they can't get in without the password. By the way, the password will be encrypted and it will be included in the URL that you share. Therefore, what I recommend is that when you share your meeting ID, you share it privately, targeted to the people you want to invite. If you're creating a public meeting, you might want to have a gateway like Eventbrite or Meetup or something like that in front of it so you can track who is asking for the Zoom meeting URL so that you can not give it out to people you don't want to give it out to. Or the alternative for a public Zoom session would be to use Zoom Webinar. And with Zoom Webinar, you can ask questions, collect name, first name, last name, phone number if you ask for it, email address, and other questions before you give the person the encrypted Zoom Webinar URL. So it's much safer to do public events in webinar than it is in meeting. Now, this is creating a Zoom meeting with the password. By the way, a couple other things. You can also enable waiting room. I recommend you do that for smaller groups so you know who you're letting in. Also, mute participants on entry. I highly recommend you do that. And then you can also have alternative hosts put their email addresses in there so that they're alerted to be a host when they come into Zoom. I'll show you another way you can make a co-host when you're managing a meeting. So use these options, and I'll show you when you schedule it, how to manage security in a Zoom meeting. Okay, so here's my Zoom meeting where I had the password on it. And if you go look right here, you'll see that over under the participants tab, I have one person waiting. So I can send them a message, who invited you, but they can't respond. And so I guess the only use of sending the message at this point is to confirm that they were invited or not. And you could say to them, if you're not invited, I'm going to remove you. And so you have the option of removing them from the waiting room before they get into your meeting. Now, once they're into the meeting, I'm going to admit her. Now Rebecca's a part of the meeting. Now, notice this. I hover over her name. See where I have more? I can remove her or put her back in the waiting room if she becomes problematic. All right? Now let's talk about another important aspect of security or managing your Zoom meetings. If you have a large group, then what large to me is more than 15 people. I recommend that you have a co-host. Notice I can make Rebecca a co-host. By making her a co-host, she has the ability to do most of, not all, but most of what a host has the ability to do. Now, if I could switch and I could make her the host, when I make her the host, I become a participant. Bottom line, you want to pay attention to these security options. Put a password. Share the Zoom URL privately. If you're going to share it publicly, put it behind a gateway like Eventbrite or Meetup or something like that so people have to register. If you're going to do a larger meeting with 20 or more people, I recommend you go to Webinar. Webinar allows you to have people register, and you can ask questions for validation, name, email address, phone number, company, etc., so you validate before they get the URL to the webinar. And lastly, if you're going to have a large group of 10 or 15 more, I recommend you have a co-host who can help you manage participants and help get rid of those who cause problems. Now let's talk about navigating the Zoom window as an attendee, or as a participant is the right word. So as a participant, this is what you'll see. If you're in gallery view, right now I'm in gallery view. I could switch to speaker view. You can see in the upper right hand corner. But I could, I can see Rebecca Burris, my business partner / wife, and then I have my picture on mine. She doesn't have a picture, so it shows her name, not her picture. And then you can see at the bottom, this is what I call the toolbar for Zoom. You have mute and unmute, start video, stop video. The little triangles on the bottom left of the screen are for you to change and configure your audio, configure your video settings. Then you'll see you have participants, you have chat, share screen if the host will allow you to share screen. Because remember, I'm in as a participant. Then you'll also see that I have record if the host will give me record functionality. And then I have reactions for what I see, and then leave meeting. It's really pretty easy, the options you have as a participant in a Zoom window. I do encourage you to hover over and even click on these just so you can experiment with them before you really get serious about using Zoom. As I said earlier, is to the right of the mute button is a little triangle or arrow that lets you select your audio, microphone, speaker, test your speaker or microphone, switch to phone if you want to, or leave computer audio, which kills off your audio altogether. And then you'll see under the to the right of start video or stop video if you have it running. You can select your camera. I have a FaceTime camera or whatever camera you have, choose your virtual background, or go into video settings and have access to all of the settings. Again, I recommend you review these, and I seriously recommend you test your speaker and your microphone before you join a meeting. The last other two things to show you, and I'll show this to you live, is as a participant or as an attendee, you have this is the participant window, so you can see who else is on there. You can see if their microphone is open or not. You can also, if the host lets you do that, you can invite others. You can unmute yourself, raise your hand, and the merge window just hangs the participant window off of the main window when you're in a Zoom session. In the chat, you have the ability to chat with an individual, privately, or with everyone. And then it's just the basic chat functionality. Again, depending on how the host set this meeting up, some of these features are enabled, some of them are disabled. Now the full-blown dashboard, now I'm showing you the Mac interface because I'm using a Mac. The PC interface is going to be a little different. The functionality will be the same. But you can see I have my home button, which brings me here. I can bring up the chat box. I can go look at different meetings. I can go to look at my contacts if I had in fact put contacts into my Zoom dashboard. I don't do that. Then you can see that I have the ability to start a new meeting, join a meeting based on a meeting ID, schedule a new meeting, or share my screen right now. And these features are available in this format on the Mac interface, the application. The interface is a little bit different. The functionality is the same if you access this dashboard from the web interface. So scheduling a meeting through the Mac application is pretty easy. Just give it a topic, pick the date, and the start date and the stop date, and the start time and the stop time. Is it a recurring meeting? You can create a recurring meeting that's weekly or monthly or infrequently recurring. Pick the time zone. I recommend you use the time zone that you are in when you're doing the meeting. You can use a meeting ID that's either your personal meeting ID or the one that's generated automatically. Strongly recommend you use a password on your meetings. And then do you turn your host video on or off, participants video on or off when the meeting starts. You can also decide what kind of audio connection they want. Typically telephone and computer is best. And then you can decide what type of calendar creation to create, a Google Calendar or an iCal. Typically leave it on iCal if you're going to create an invite by using a calendar. You also have the advanced options when you're creating or scheduling a meeting. Enable waiting room, which I recommend. You can, especially for smaller meetings, you can let people into your meeting as you wish. You can also kick people out of the meeting before they're in the meeting as they wait in the waiting room. You can allow people to join before the host if you want. You can mute participants on entry so that nobody's talking. You can also require people to be authenticated by having a Zoom account. I don't often use that because most of the time the people I invite are not active Zoom users. You can start recording the meeting immediately. Again, I don't do that because there's a little bit of prep time I want. And I can have alternative hosts. So if I want someone else to be a host, then I can put their email address in there and they'll get a slightly different invite. Setting up a Zoom meeting or scheduling a Zoom meeting on the web interface is pretty much the same. It's very similar functionality, just a different interface. And then again, you have the ability to have the meeting options that we talked about before and the password, etc., etc. And then you create it and you hit save. Now, once you have your Zoom meeting created, then you'll have the URL for that meeting, and then you can share that URL for that meeting either in a calendar invite, in a email message. You can share it in a Facebook message or a LinkedIn message. There are lots of different ways you can share that. You can put that URL on a web page. You can put it in a Slack community, in a text messages, a Twitter direct message. Not necessarily a fan of taking that URL and publicly sharing it on social. You might want to put it behind a landing page or something. Again, just to be able to manage where it goes to. So let's look at navigating a Zoom meeting as a host. So I recommend that again, here's the interface. The difference being here is that we've added polling and we've added security. That's pretty much the biggest difference. There's some functionality that's changed, but for the most part, the biggest change is we've added polling and security. Under managing your participants, which is under the More button, we have the ability to mute participants on entry, allow them to unmute themselves or not, play a chime when people show up or exit. I can allow participants to rename themselves or not. I can, once I have all of my participants in the meeting, I can lock the meeting. The only problem with that is if someone kicks out, you have to unlock it to let them back in. Enable the waiting room again, or disable it, but I recommend you use waiting room for small meetings. And then the merge to meeting window will just hang this box, the participant box, off of the main window. Additionally, you'll see that under chat, I have the three dots, and on the chat, I have the ability to let participants either chat with no one, which means shut down chat completely. I can, for participants, I can let them chat with the host only, everyone publicly, or give them full chat functionality, which means they can chat with everyone publicly or privately. You'll notice that the waiting room is enabled. Then when someone joins, such as Rebecca in this case, she is in the waiting room waiting for me to admit her or go see who else is in the waiting room. And then you'll also see, as the host, I have the ability to, from the participants window under More, I have the ability to chat with her directly, ask her to start her video, make her a host or co-host, or put her back in the waiting room, or totally remove her as the host. Now, as the host, you have the ability to share. And participants can share as well if the host lets them. But when you hit the share button, this is what you get. I can share my desktop or a whiteboard. Now, I use a whiteboard often to share my meeting agenda, maybe some housekeeping tips, whatever upfront information I want them to know about before I get started. And when I start the live Zoom meeting, then I shut down the whiteboard, stop sharing, and I share whatever else I want to share. Typically, I'll share my desktop. You also, because I'm using a Mac, I have the ability to share either via AirPlay or cable, my iPhone or my iPad. I also have the ability to share any open application. And when I did the screenshot, I had Evernote, I had iTunes Music, I had my Activity Monitor, and Slack running. So I could share any of those applications, including Google Chrome. Now, if you're going to share your desktop or any application during a Zoom meeting, I recommend that, example, your desktop, clean it off. Get rid of all the stuff that's on your home page or your desktop. Clean it all off and make it presentable. If you're going to share an application, make sure the screen in the application when you start sharing is the screen you want them to see. Example, I wouldn't want them to see my Evernote private conversations, or I wouldn't want them to see my Google inbox because maybe there's private conversation. So make sure what you have on display, either desktop or applications, before you hit the share button is content that you're okay publicly sharing. One other point, you'll notice on the bottom left-hand side of this screen, I have share computer sound. Now I've tested this. If I'm going to share a YouTube video, turn that on because it actually presents pretty decently. Without that on, it does not present well. And then once you select what you want to share and how you want to share it, hit the share button. Again, experiment, hover, try things out. So when you are sharing, you will notice a few things that have changed on what I call the toolbar. First of all, now I have pause sharing or stop sharing. I also have annotate, so I can scribble on the screen, and I can furthermore let others scribble on the screen. It's such a, that's an enable attendee annotation or disable it. I can show the names of the people who are making those annotations. You'll also see I have the ability to give remote control to an attendee. Again, I recommend you experiment with the toolbar before you get into your first serious Zoom meeting. So as a host, I have the ability to do polling questions. I can create polling questions up front. You do that from the desktop or from the web browser. So if I go to under edit here, if I go to create a polling question, it's going to open this up in the application in a web browser. I can create the poll name and create the poll questions. And then you can see I have the ability to show it, and then I can launch it. When you're launching a poll, there's a poll that's launched. It'll show you how many seconds it's been up. I can see the percent of engagement and the percent of answers. And then once I end the poll, I can share the poll so others can see the responses to the poll, and then I have the ability to stop sharing. Again, experiment with this. Play with it a little bit so you get good at it. And then it becomes more efficient and effective. Again, as the host, I have other features, including live streaming on YouTube, live streaming on Facebook Live. So when I do this, I have the ability to choose, especially on Facebook, where do I want to share it, my timeline, someone else's timeline, in a group, in an event, in a business page. And all these options create different setups in live streaming, but you need to set it up so you get it to work. I will tell you that live streaming to Facebook today will change. Don't know when. They want us to go to this new tool called Live Producer. Takes a little bit more to get used to, a little bit more to set it up, but it's supposedly going to be a better way of live streaming from Zoom into Facebook. And the last thing to share with you in a Zoom meeting as the host is you have the ability to record. So you'll notice the record button. I can record on this computer or to the cloud. Now there are limits to recording to the cloud. You only get a certain amount of space. It might be 1 gigabyte to start with. I typically record to my own computer, and that works best for me because then I can move it over to Dropbox, and I have the ability to share it via Dropbox. I also am a fan of making sure that everyone on the call realizes that you're recording it and how you're going to use it. So let's go live on Zoom. Give me a moment to get set up. Okay, so I have a meeting running on my iPad, which I'm simulating someone else doing a meeting. And I'm going to go here, I'm going to say join a meeting. Right here, join a meeting. I have the app, I have the Zoom app running. Now, if I didn't have the Zoom app running, I could go to zoom.us and I could log into my account. And then I can say right here, join a meeting. Same thing as I could do up here. And then I could type in the meeting ID. Let me type in that meeting ID. So I've asked to join the meeting. And so now I have to wait for the host who she sees that I've asked to get into the waiting room. So she'll click on see waiting room, or she'll click on admit. And so there's that admit button. Now she's admitted me in out of the waiting room, and so I can decide to join with computer audio or test my speakers. I'm going to do with computer audio. So you'll see now that I'm looking at what she's sharing. She's sharing her camera, and I'll over here wave it as I'm her. So you'll see that I'm looking at her camera, and typically I would be looking at her. You can see in the bottom left of the screen, it shows the internet bandwidth, how good that is. White is in good shape. Yellow or red would be in bad shape. You can see that her microphone is muted, just as you can see up here, my microphone is muted. Then you can also see that I have my audio muted and my camera muted. But if I go over here and hit this up arrow, you can see that I can choose which microphone to use. I can choose which speaker to use. And you can further see, I'm going to go to MacBook, use that microphone. And you can see that I can see which speaker, so I can use the MacBook Pro speakers. Now you can also see over here on audio, I can see, on video, which camera do I want to use, FaceTime camera or my webcam. And then you can also see video settings. As I said earlier, I can go into that, and that takes me into full, what's called preferences, where I can use general and I can make all these adjustments, however I want to make these adjustments. And then once I configure these, I can hit the X or the red dot and get out of that. And you can see I still have not turned on my microphone or turned on my camera. I don't want to do that while I'm recording this class. I can also see who the participants are, who's in here, whose camera's on, whose camera's off. If she turns her camera off, you can see her camera's now off. I have the ability, because she allows me to do it, to invite, to unmute myself, raise my hand, or merge the window, which hangs it over here. You can see I have the chat option. So now in chat, I can either chat with everyone or just Rebecca. So I can send her a message. Or if I want to chat with everyone. Now she has the ability to host to manage that, but you can see I can do that. And then you can see under the three dots here, I have the ability to hang that off over here as well. So I have my participants up top and my chat down below. Now I have the ability to share screen if she'll allow me. She has to give me permission to do that. I'll show you that when I show host. I have the ability to record if she gives me that option. If I hit that button, I've just sent her a message and asked her for permission to do that. And then I have the ability to do reactions and high five, celebrate, and thumbs up. That's pretty much it. I have the ability to change gallery view. So I can see this. Let me turn her camera back on. If I turn my camera back on, then you'll see there's me and there's Rebecca. Rebecca's waving over here. And that's speaker view, or actually it's gallery view. If I switch to speaker view, then it shows her, because of the way I have mine set up, it will always show her. And the way I've changed that, again, is I went over here under video settings, and I've chosen video. So I don't have this turned on. If I turn that on and come out of it, now when I'm talking, it's going to show me. If Rebecca's talking, going to show her. So again, it's pretty straightforward. If I stop, go back to gallery view, it's really pretty straightforward. And if she's sharing, then you're going to be able to see more of what she's sharing. So I'm going to move out. I'm going to shut down acting as a participant. I'm going to switch to be a host and show you a little bit more. Give me a moment. Okay, so now I'm playing host, and Rebecca, I sent her an invite, and through that I sent her that invitation URL, and now she wants to join the meeting. So she sent me a join request. Now I have the ability to admit her or see the waiting room. When I see the waiting room, I can see one person's waiting. I can either remove her, kick her out, or let her in. Now when I let her in, you'll see I have two participants, and I don't have anybody in the waiting room. So now as host, I have pretty much the same functionality that I had as participants, except for a little bit more. And let me show you the new things that I have. So I have the security options. I can lock the meeting. Now nobody else can get in unless I unlock the meeting. I can enable or disable the waiting room, so anybody who does show up would be in the waiting room waiting. If I undid that and I undid lock meeting, now anybody who shows up would come directly in the meeting. I prefer to use the waiting room. You'll also see that I can allow participants to share their screen or not. I can allow them to chat or not, and I can allow them to rename themselves or not. And furthermore, I can remove a participant. And the only one I can remove that's not me is Rebecca. So that's all under security. You'll also see under participants, I have a few other options. Like if I hover over Rebecca, I have the more. So I can ask her to start her video. If I do that, she's going to get a message over here. And I will say, she'll say, okay. So now her video is started. So you can see her video. If she was standing over there, you'd see her. If I start my own video, you'll see both my video and her video side by side here. I can also over here under more, I can make her a host or co-host, give her the ability to do some of the controls that I have the ability to do. If I make her a host, I become a participant. But making her a co-host gives both of us the options. I can put her back in the waiting room or I can remove her. You can also see under chat that I have the ability to have these chat options. I can let participants chat with no one, only the host, everyone publicly, or everyone publicly or privately, which is for smaller groups, you want to allow people to engage. So smaller groups, you want that. That's how you get ideation and collaboration. As the host, here's the sharing options. So I can share my desktop. I can share my whiteboard. And again, when I share a whiteboard, I usually use that often to put up my agenda, whatever is important for me to share with everyone as they're coming to the meeting. And once the meeting's ready to get started, I typically go over here, I stop sharing, and then I go back down to share, and I decide what I want to share to bring them into the conversations. So if I share my desktop, then whatever I'm seeing is what the participant is going to see. So you want to be very purposeful about not having something on your screen that you don't want to share. And then I can stop sharing. Again, as the host, I have polling. So if I have any polling questions set up, I can do those. I can launch the poll, so I can wait for people to engage on it. And as they engage on it, submit, you'll see that one person chose this conversation. And then I can end the poll, and then I can share the results. And then all the participants will see the results. And then once I'm done, I can stop sharing, and I can come out of this, and then I'm done with the poll. And then I have the record option. Again, I like to record on my computer, even though you can record to the cloud. But if you're using Dropbox or Box or any other, OneDrive, then you can put these MP4 files into your Dropbox and share the Dropbox link. And if you are recording, you'll notice it up here that it's got the little dot, and all the participants will see either the little red dot flashing, or they'll see the record button, that red record that says it's being recorded. So they know it's being recorded. I typically alert people that I'm starting the recording. And I can pause the recording or I can stop the recording. If you stop the recording and you go down and you start a new recording, then you'll get 2 recording files. If you're recording and you pause the recording, then when you can resume it, you'll only get 1 recording file. I haven't experimented with breakout rooms yet, so I'm not going to teach you that. Breakout rooms could be useful if you have a larger group and you want to put a group of people from finance together, or operations, or have subset groups of conversations. Reactions, just let me hit the celebrate button or the high five button, whatever. And then under more, you'll see I can go live on Facebook or live on YouTube. I'm not going to demonstrate that, but it's worth knowing about. Not every meeting should go live. Think about that for a minute. If they are public meetings, then maybe going live on YouTube or Facebook would be worthwhile. Now, I have the ability to switch from gallery view to speaker view, so I can switch back and forth. If you're going live, I recommend this gallery view because it shows up better on live than speaker view does. This lets me go full screen. So now I'm full screen and everything else is off the screen, which can be very useful if you're recording, can be very useful if you're going live. And you can hit the escape button and come out of full screen. And that's pretty much it. Those are all the features that you have available to you as a host in a Zoom meeting. But it is pretty feature rich, notice it's pretty easy, it's very responsive, and I like the way it works. At the end of the meeting, If I'm recording, I'll show you that. At the end of the meeting, I hit end. I can leave the meeting for others to stay in it. I can give Zoom feedback if I wish, if I was having problems. But I can hit end meeting for all and watch what happens. And you'll see it brings up the converting meeting recording. Happens pretty quick for a short one. Saves it. You can see there were 2 files right there. And then I can take and save those off, put them in Dropbox, share it with others. Now, another idea to introduce you to is Zoom webinars. I like Zoom webinars. I use it a lot for larger groups of diverse people. If they're all in the same company, the meeting may work. Webinar gives you a little bit more control. Example, gives you panelists and participants. Participants are by default no camera, no audio. They can just listen. I have a practice session. So if you're doing a Zoom webinar, when you go to create a webinar, you can enable practice session. Practice session is all the panelists come together, they get organized, get ready, and then you click a button that says go live. Broadcast is what they call it. With Zoom webinar, you can require registration, and when you require registration, you can collect answers to questions. You get their name, their email address, and you can ask them other questions relevant to the webinar so that you're prepared to speak to them based on what you learn. With Webinar Tool, you can have pre-webinar and post-webinar emails sent out via Zoom. You get webinar reports, how many people registered and what information you collected during registration. You can see who attended, who didn't attend, and some other content that's worth looking at. You can create, just like with a meeting, you can create recurring webinars so that you register once and you can get onto all the webinars that are recurring. You have Q&A functionality, with a little bit different than chat. You can have up to 100 participants, just like with meeting. You can pay for larger webinars if you want, but you can also live stream a webinar, again, to Facebook or YouTube. You have full attendee control, very similar to what you had in meeting. You have webinar templates, so you can create a template that has a series of, registration questions. You're going to go live. You have Q&A questions, you have polling questions all built in, ready to go for your next webinar. And furthermore, most of the functionality you have in meeting, you have that also in webinar. So you really want to use Zoom meetings for collaborative conversations and discussions with groups of people who work together or who are working together. You want to use Zoom meetings when you want to have a good conversation, between collaborative groups of people that can be done virtually. I tell you, with most things I teach, practice it, and you'll figure out how to use it. You'll understand what you need to click on, what you need to turn on, and what you need to turn off, so that you can create the best opportunity, the best environment with a virtual meeting. I'm Teddy Burris. I love using Zoom meetings. They're very efficient for me, and I think if you start experimenting with them, you'll be able to use them effectively and efficiently as well. Thank you very much for attending this class. I hope you got some good tips from it.